Alright, proportional relationships. We have this example. So it says Kyle earns $56.85 in 1 day of a 7.5 hour shift. So every day he earns this much money, and he works every day for 7.5 hours. Okay? How much would he earn in 5 days? So what we're going to do is we've got to make a relationship. There's technically kind of three things to relate here. First thing we'll say is the money. So how much he makes. Okay, so his money, he makes $56.85. There's days work. Days work. And in order to earn that much, how many days does he have to work?
6 or 5.
No, he only has to work.
Oh, 1 day.
Yeah. So we're just doing the original stuff here. And then there's the hours he works. How many hours does he have to work to get the same amount?
7 hours.
7 hours or 7.5.
7.5.
Yeah. So really, this is kind of a proportional relationship. Okay, as long as we keep our topics kind of in line here. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to set up the ratio. And they can also be written as fractions. We'll rewrite the same thing as fractions. It's just it'd be hard to write 3 fractions on top of each other. So we write it as a ratio like this. Now the question wants to know how much will you earn in 5 days? Well, days, that kind of falls in our middle one here, right? They want to know how much he earns in 5 days. They don't really care about the hours, so the hours kind of drops off. We don't need to fill anything out there. But we do want to know how much he earns. That's what the question is asking. They want to know how much does he earn. Okay. Well, since those are the two we're working with, we'll be working with money and days work, we're going to set those up as fractions. Okay. And it doesn't matter which is on top or the bottom as long as we just have our equivalent fractions here. So 56.85, and I'm just going to say over 1. Okay. In other words, these two are related to each other. Okay. So 56 over 1. In other words, this is how much money he makes per day, right? But I didn't have to include the money sign or the day. I just wrote those two together. They're equal to, okay? And just remember, we wrote days on the bottom, and we wrote money on top, okay? Equal to, well, the money is what we're trying to find, so we're going to call that X, divided by, how many days is he working in this case?
1 or 5.
5, yeah. So they want to figure out how much money he'll make in 5 days. So this is how we've set this up as a fraction. Now this is an equivalent fraction. So what we can do here, okay, and it's because it's equal to, two fractions that are equal to, we can do something called cross multiplying to simplify. All right, so to get rid of the fractions, we're going to cross multiply. And this is just because they're equal fractions. Okay, so we go down. 1 times x is just going to be 1x. And do I have to include the 1? What would 1 times x be?
It'd just be x.
Yeah, so I can just write it as x. The other number we're going to have to calculate, so let's take our calculator out here. Oops, lost it. 56.85 times 5. Okay, 284.25. So, 284 point, what did we say, 25?
Yeah.
Yeah, 0.25. Okay. So what we just discovered is x is equal to 284.25. So in other words, in 5 days' work, he makes 284.25. I'll just erase that so I can write it in. He makes that much money, 284.25. So we've just fulfilled that part of the ratio. Okay. We could technically, if we want, I could also figure out how many hours he works. And you know what? Let's do that on the side. Even though they didn't ask us, let's see if we can calculate that. Okay. In this example, we're going to be working with days worked and hours. Okay. And we're trying to solve how many hours he'd have to work in 5 days. So we'll call that our x. Or in this case, we'll call it y. Just stands for an unknown. Okay. How can I set up this fraction? Which ones are related to each other?
Days work and hours.
Yeah? Okay, so we're going to relate the numbers 1 and 7.5. So how can I write those?
7.5 over 1.
Sure. 7.5 over 1. So what did we put on top? Hours or days?
Hours.
Okay, so I'm just going to write that on the side so that I know hours are going to stay on top, which means days are on the bottom, right? So what would the other equivalent fraction be?
Um, 5 or y over 5.
That's right, y over 5. All right, how can I simplify this? Or how can I solve for y?
Cross multiply.
Okay. So when I do 1 times y, what will I get?
Y.
Yeah. And then 7.5 times 5. Where is multiply? Oh, there it is 5. So how many hours did he work?
37.5
hours. So he works apparently is equal to 37.5 hours. That's how many hours he'd work in 5 days. Okay?
What
Now,
I did for when I did the question in class, I just times 56.8
by 5.
times 5.
Yeah, you're right. And that's exactly what we did when we cross-multiplied. Look, when we cross-multiplied, we ended up with 5 times that amount. That's exactly what we did. This is just a way to help us set it up so it's a little easier to look at. Okay? 6 minutes. Okay. So there's another question they want to ask. What is his hourly rate? Okay. Hourly rate. So how many hours is that then in terms of a ratio? What is an hourly rate? What are they trying to figure out? How much money he makes per what?
Per hour.
Per hour. So we're trying to figure out how much money. We're going to call it Z. That'll be our unknown. And that's per hour. So how many hours is that? What number does that represent?
1.
1. Okay. So we already have some equivalent fractions here. All these ratios work now. I can use either these 3 numbers or I can use these 3 numbers. Now, in this case, we're using money and hours. We don't need days worked, right? And really, 1 hour is not a day's work. It'll be point something of a day. It won't be a full 1 full day. So we're going to set these up as equivalent ratios. How can I set these up? What 2 numbers on the top 3 can I use to be a fraction here?
The money and the hours.
Okay, so what fraction would I use?
56.85.
Mhm.
And 7.5.
Okay, and which one do we want to put on top? Which on the bottom?
Money.
Okay, so we'll put money on top, 56.85. I'm just going to do it in red. Divided by 7.5. Okay, so money on top, hours on the bottom. Okay, and that's equal to what? What are we trying to find?
Days work. Well, that. We're looking for the hours, right?
Well, we already know the hours. How many hours has he worked?
1.
1. So where's that go? Top or bottom of the other fraction?
Bottom.
Yeah. And what goes on top?
The hourly.
What are we trying to find?
Oh, the money?
Yeah, the money. We're trying to figure out money. So we called that variable Z in this case. Okay. So what can we do to simplify?
Cross multiply.
Okay, so we cross multiply. Now in this one, we're going to get 56.85 times the number 1 is equal to 7.5 times Z. Now 1 times that, we'll keep it as 56.85. But we're going to have 7.5 Z. And we're trying to find out what Z is. That's our unknown, right?
Yeah.
So how do I get Z by itself? How do I move that 7.5 to the other side?
I don't know.
What operation is this? 7.5. What operation is between it and Z?
Multiply.
That's right. So if it's multiplied, how do I move it to the other side?
You would have to divide it.
That's right. We're going to have to divide on the other side by 7.5. So now this is going to read Z is equal to, and we have to calculate this. 56.85 divided by 7.5. He makes $7.58 an hour. 58 or 85, sorry.
58.
58. $7.58 an hour. Okay. So all it really is setting up equivalent ratios in these questions.